Schneps Media is proud to present a series of Long Island Congressional Candidate Forums sponsored by AARP New York, so you can get more informed as you cast your vote on Election Day, November 5th, 2024. On this episode of Schneps Connects, we're joined by Laura Gillen, the Democratic candidate for Congress's 4th District of New York. The district encompasses central and southern Nassau County, including the communities of Elmont, Baldwin, Belmore, East Rockaway, East Meadow, Five Towns, Limbrook, Floral Park, Franklin Square, Garden City Park, Hempstead, Atlantic Beach, Long Beach, Malvern, Freeport, Merrick, Carl Place, New Hyde Park, Oceanside, Rockville Center, Roosevelt, Seaford, Uniondale, Valley Stream, Wantagh, West Hempstead, and Westbury. Laura, thanks so much for being with us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Josh. Glad to be on.
So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your background experience for our listeners and viewers.
Sure. Thank you. You did a great job outlining the 4th Congressional District, so I don't need to do that. But again, my name is Laura Gillen, and I'm asking for your vote in the 4th Congressional District. This is a district where I have really deep roots. My Italian immigrant grandfather came and settled in the district with his young family, got a job working in the sanitation department for the town of Hempstead, not really any money for higher education for his family, but through his sacrifice and the sacrifice of my parents, I was able to go to college. I went to Georgetown and then on to NYU Law School and became an attorney. Worked and did a lot of pro bono work helping victims of domestic violence. I worked in India for Mother Teresa in Calcutta, worked helping people living with HIV in the early 90s with a group called GMHC. So giving back is part of who I am. And I think back to the time when I got elected supervisor, and it was amazing. In just 2 generations, we saw my family go from the back of a garbage truck to the CEO's office when I became that first Democrat in 112 years to get elected supervisor of the town of Hempstead, which is the largest township in the United States. And I got elected with a lot of bipartisan support. But when I got there, I had a Republican-controlled town board who didn't always make it easy for me to get things done. But whether through a carrot or a stick, I was able to deliver for the residents of the town of Hempstead, which comprises most of this congressional district. I went into work every day with a good government agenda, just thinking about how can I deliver the best results for the constituents of the town. And as I said, was able to work across the aisle, get things done. Lowered your taxes 2 years in a row. I'm the only supervisor in recent memory who consistently lowered your taxes. My opponent, Anthony D'Esposito, who was on the town board with me, and preceded me on the town board. As soon as he got to town hall, he voted to raise your taxes 2 years in a row. He only stopped when I got there. And now we've just seen, actually this past week, the town of Hempstead, left back in Republican control, is raising taxes over 12%. That's shocking. But, I was able to accomplish other things there. I took aim at waste and nepotism and corruption and passed sweeping ethics reform. I was able to refinance our debt and save taxpayers millions of dollars. And I was really proud of the work that I got done there. And I'm taking that same can-do bipartisanship, moderate voice and attitude to Washington, hopefully with your help in just 15 days when I get elected to be the congresswoman for this district, because Washington is broken. Things are not getting done. We see hyper-partisanship ruling the day where people are just pointing fingers and not delivering results. Look, my opponent had 2 years at the table. He hasn't delivered. He hasn't secured the border. He hasn't gotten our SALT deduction back. He hasn't addressed rising costs. And he certainly hasn't protected reproductive freedom. So I'm running for Congress because I believe that I can deliver on these things with the approach that I will bring.
So, Laura, in the current campaign, what would you say are 3 of the most important issues that you're focused on? And what's your stance on each of them?
Sure. Look, securing the border is a really important issue in this district. We need to have comprehensive immigration reform. I'm not in Congress. My opponent seems to say that I've been voting on stuff. When you're not in Congress, you can't vote on stuff. But what we need to do is have a path forward. And that path forward revolves bipartisanship. If you're going to tackle something as massive and as important as immigration reform, you should have the buy-in from both sides of the aisle so you can pass a law that will stand the test of time and any swing in the majority in the next Congress. We need to fix our broken asylum system. People applying for asylum are currently waiting 5 to 7 years. They're laying in limbo. It's putting their lives in the state of limbo, but it's also not fair for us because we have people who maybe don't have valid claims who are sticking around for longer than they should stick around here. So we need to fix that. We need to secure our border, make sure that it's not easy for people to just sneak in here, and make sure that fentanyl is not getting across the border. We need to create a pathway to citizenship to incentivize folks who want to come here in the proper way, in the proper channels, as so many of our ancestors did. And so we need to make sure that we do this on day one. That's what I will do in Congress. As I said, this is a top polling issue in this district. It's something that people really care about. And I'm committed that I will talk to my colleagues, not only on my side of the aisle, but the other side of the aisle, to say, look, the presidential election is behind us. Now let's go forward and let's do something for the American people. My opponent, on the other hand, likes to go on cable news and point fingers and say it's all the Biden administration's fault. But he didn't work in a bipartisan fashion in any sense to deliver real relief for the American people. And in fact, he applauded Greg Abbott when he sent 40,000 migrants to New York. He said that was a good move. That's disgraceful. He's supposed to represent New York. And when New Yorkers were looking for help dealing with the costs, the unbelievable costs of feeding and clothing people who are dumped on our street, he again went on Fox News. What I would have been doing is saying to the federal government, this is a federally created problem. New York taxpayers should not be paying for this alone because this is a problem you created. So getting some federal tax dollars here to take that burden off the New York State taxpayers, who are among the highest taxpayers in the entire country. And that's what I'm going to do in Congress. You know, the cost of living is a really big issue. We pay among the highest property taxes. I pay property taxes. I own a home, and we need to get that state and local tax deduction back. My opponent has had 2 years. He's been in the majority. If he was effective, he could have brought it to the floor and gotten it passed without even one Democratic vote. He has not done that. Democrats have previously passed this in the House. I was just with Leader Hakeem Jeffries. If he becomes Speaker, he's fully committed to making sure one of the first things we do, if we have a Democratic majority, is to pass the restoration of the full state and local tax deduction. Again, my opponent and now Donald Trump are saying, oh, we're going to do it. Donald Trump is the one who took away the deduction in the first place. And we already have the Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee has said that there is no way the Republicans will ever reinstate a full SALT deduction. So if you want your SALT deduction back, you need to vote for me and vote to help get other Democrats elected, because we're the ones who are going to give it back to you. And then, you know, reproductive freedom is a really important issue. We can codify Roe v. Wade. We can protect the right to IVF. We can protect women's right to contraception. Shockingly, there was a bill brought to the floor that failed because Republicans didn't believe that women should have the right to contraception. I believe in making sure we codify protections so that people can decide when and how they want to start a family. You know, government has no business in those decisions. And then, of course, in terms of foreign policy, we are seeing unprecedented Iranian aggression in the Middle East, fighting wars through its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel and make sure that we are standing strong in the face of Iranian aggression and deter them from any further aggression in the Middle East. And hopefully, with the elimination of Sinwar, we can maybe find a path to peace in that region, as long as the hostages are returned and Hamas is eradicated.
Thank you. I would like to talk about family caregivers and get your feedback. 48 million Americans help their loved ones each day to remain independent in their homes and communities. These family caregivers sacrifice time and money and provide $600 billion annually in unpaid support. How would you help family caregivers?
Look, this is an issue that really hits home for me. I lost my father last year, but prior to losing him, he was suffering with some dementia. And so we saw the burden it was starting to take on my mother as his condition got worse in terms of taking care of him. And quite frankly, that's a model that we see being played out across the country, where you have aging parents and one spouse or one child or other caregiver is taking on the burden. Because one, there's a maze of bureaucracy that if you're even trying to get access to getting Medicare to help you pay for home assistance, it's really, really difficult to do. I know because I was trying to do it, to figure out this maze of how do I get a hospital bed in the house for my father after he broke his hip? How can I get Medicare to cover some coverage so my mother can leave the house every now and then? And I ultimately thought I was going to have to hire a consultant to do that. Well, a lot of American families can't afford to do that. They don't even know that there are consultants out there for these things. I only found out about it because I had a friend who'd just gone through the same situation with her father. So one thing I want to make accessible in my office is I want to streamline this process and try to make it easier for families to navigate the approach to dealing with caring for our aging population, our aging parents and relatives. There's also, as we see people taking on this role of caregivers, a lot of times you want a family member to be the caregiver, and that saves costs elsewhere because then we're not seeing those folks going into rehab homes or nursing homes. So we have to find a way to make sure that those folks can get compensated through Medicare for the work that they are doing in place of a paid caregiver. If we do go the route of a paid caregiver, I think it's really important to support folks like those in SEIU to make sure they have a living wage and that they have the training to become a very proper caregiver. And I would support things like there's the Bipartisan Credit for Caring Act, which would create a tax credit for family caregivers to provide some financial relief for the people who have incurred costs and made sacrifices relating to caregiver. Right now, it hasn't received a vote in the committee. That means the Republicans are in the majority. They're holding it up. I would move that bill forward and be committed to moving that bill forward. There's also another bipartisan bill called Connecting Caregivers to Medicare Act, which would aim to better connect family caregivers to Medicare resources, like I just described, including other things that would allow Medicare beneficiaries to let Medicare share their health information with their caregivers. It still hasn't received a vote in committee either, and my opponent hasn't co-sponsored either of those bills. Those are bills that I would support and try to move forward.
Another big issue is Social Security. The Social Security Trust Fund is expected to see a shortfall in 10 years. If Congress doesn't act, millions of Americans who are counting on Social Security will see cuts to the money they've earned. Do you see a path for Congress to work on a bipartisan solution to protect Social Security for those who have earned it?
Social Security, I can think about it. I think about my grandmother. Like for her, it was a lifeline. Her Social Security check is largely how she survived. And that is true of so many people. Not only is it something that they earned and that they're entitled to, it is the means by which they support themselves. It is their pension. And so therefore, it is something that absolutely must be preserved. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And it is a bipartisan issue because these are not just Democrats or not just Republicans. And again, it's not limited to one race, not one faith. It's Americans across the country are relying on having their Social Security there for them, and they are entitled to receive it. So we must come together, Democrats and Republicans, to make sure that we are securing Social Security and that the resources are there for those who are entitled to them. My opponent, I will say, has voted against the interests of Social Security. In September of 2023, he voted for the failed Republican budget cuts that would have caused about 250 Social Security offices to shorten their hours or close, which would cut off access to resources for people receiving Social Security benefits. And prior to that, in April of 23, he voted for the Republican failed debt limit deal that would have cut Social Security administration funding by between 18 to 51%. So that would have had dramatic impact on the ability for Social Security recipients to receive their benefits. We look to Project 2025 and what's in there, where you'll see entitlement programs like this disappear. And the Republicans have been talking for a long time about raising the age or making cuts to the benefit received. Those are no-go for me. Again, this is a program people have bought into, they're entitled to it. And just recently in Newsday, we saw an article about how even with the current model of benefits that you're entitled to receive, the cost of living increases really aren't keeping up to pace with the cost of living, particularly in areas which are much more expensive, like the 4th Congressional District. So that's something that we have to look at as well.
The last part here really is just why Long Islanders should vote for you.
Sure. I think the difference between me and my opponent is clear. I've always approached government service as public service. I went into work every day with just a good government agenda, not thinking, is this Republican or is this Democrat, but what is the best result for the people that I represent, all the people that I represent. My opponent looks at public service as self-service. Your elected officials are supposed to be working for you, but this has been the least productive Congress since the Civil War, and nothing is getting done. And Anthony D'Esposito is more interested in blaming the other side than working with the other side. He even said that the things that people are worried about now are the same things they were worried about 2 years ago. Well, he's been there for 2 years. We sent him there to deliver, and he's failed. He hasn't delivered on salt. He could force the bill to the floor. He's in the majority, but he hasn't done that. He hasn't secured our border. He hasn't addressed the rising costs that are facing people living in this district. Instead, what we've seen, I'm sure many of you have heard about or read the story about what we've seen from him is he took the same corruption that he peddled in the town of Hempstead, where the Supreme Court found that he violated the town of Hempstead Code of Ethics because he was giving out favors to his friends and family. He voted to give his mother a raise, among many other things. And he brought that same conduct. He didn't learn his lesson. He brought the same conduct to his congressional office, where the first thing he did was hire his fiance's daughter to work on his payroll. And then inexplicably, he hired the mistress that he was cheating on his fiance with also to work in his district office. It's not even clear if she ever showed up for work. So he's taking your tax dollars and he's giving it away to friends and family. In the meantime, nothing's getting done. So in Congress, I am going to be thinking about your families and the issues that you're talking about at your kitchen table, because I have 4 kids. I live here. Those are the same issues that I'm going to be thinking about and talking about at my kitchen table. And instead of blaming the other side, I'm going to work with the other side, put this hyper-partisanship to bed, and let's start doing things. And that's what you can count on me to do in Congress, just like I did in the town of Hempstead.
Thank you so much for joining us, Laura. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. This episode of Schneps Connects is sponsored by AARP New York. You can listen to our podcast at podcast.schnepsmedia.com or stream us on all major podcast networks.